Hey, intern! The CEO and his son are visiting today. If I find even a single piece of trash lying around, you're going to regret it.
The manager's voice echoed through the office like a crack of thunder, making several employees flinch at their desk. I watched as Manager Peterson's face reddened with each word, his tie slightly askew as he jabbed a finger in my direction. His reputation for being a tyrant preceded him, but experiencing it firsthand was something else entirely. The department's atmosphere had always been toxic under his leadership, but today, the CEO's visit looming, his nastiness had reached new heights. The fluorescent lights seemed to dim under the weight of his presence as he stalked between the cubicles, searching for any excuse to berate someone. His beady eyes settled on me again, and his lip curled in disgust.
What are you standing there for? Get down on your knees and pick up trash, you worthless dropout!
He snarled, taking a threatening step forward. His hand was clenched into a fist, and for a moment, I thought he might actually try to hit me. If only he knew who I really was. The thought almost made me smile, but I kept my expression neutral. Soon enough, everyone would understand exactly what had been happening in this department. My name is Tyler Anderson, and this story begins just after my high school graduation this spring. My college acceptance already secured, I should have been celebrating like my classmates. Instead, I found myself grappling with an uncertainty that seemed to overshadow everything else. The question of my future career loomed large in my mind. While I had several passionate hobbies, the idea of turning them into a career seemed like a distant dream. After all, how many people actually get to do what they love for a living? I'd watched my classmates choose their colleges for the most predictable reasons. Parental pressure, mild interest in a subject, following friends, proximity to home, or simply matching their academic achievements. Some picked schools based on nothing more than their reputation, believing that a prestigious name would guarantee better job prospects. Most of them planned to figure out their specific career paths after starting college. I worked hard for my entrance exams, studying late into the night and sacrificing my social life. The effort paid off. I got into a well-known university that made my parents proud. But even with that accomplishment under my belt, I still felt lost about what I wanted to do with my life. It was during spring break when everything changed. I was lounging on our living room couch one afternoon, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when my father cleared his throat from his favorite armchair.
If you're just going to laze around, he said, lowering his newspaper, why not work?
I looked up, expecting to see disappointment in his eyes, but instead found an intriguing glimmer of mischief. He couldn't stand seeing me with nothing to do, but there was something else in his expression. Something that hinted at more than just a simple suggestion to get a summer job.
You can earn money,
he continued, folding his newspaper carefully.
Plus, it'll be pretty exciting.
The mysterious smile playing at the corner of his mouth made me sit up straighter. That's when he revealed his proposition, a job at his company. But not just any position. This would be something special, something that required discretion and clever thinking. The assignment would be in a department that had been showing declining performance for months, maybe years.
Something's definitely wrong there,
my father explained, leaning forward in his chair.
We've conducted audits, but whatever issues exist are being cleverly concealed. That's where you're going to investigate.
Huh? I blinked, trying to process what he was suggesting. His eyes sparkled with amusement.
Sounds fun, right? You used to love playing detective when you were little. Remember how you solved the case of the missing cookie jar?
I couldn't help but laugh at the memory. I'd been 7 when I caught our housekeeper sneaking cookies during her breaks. Instead of getting her in trouble, I joined her cookie-eating sessions, and we formed a secret pact. My father's actual mission was more serious: infiltrate the company undercover as an intern, and discover the reason behind the department's poor performance. The more he explained, the more intrigued I became. This wasn't just a summer job. It was a chance to make a real difference. The next Monday morning found me standing in the HR department, being introduced to Manager Richard Peterson. I smoothed down my carefully chosen outfit. Professional, but not too polished. Exactly what you expect from a recent high school graduate starting their first office job. Pleased to meet you. My name is Tyler Anderson, I said, bowing slightly. Peterson didn't even look up from his phone. The silence stretched uncomfortably until I tried again. Pleased to...
Shut up!
He snapped, finally looking up with a glare that could curdle milk.
I heard you the first time. A high school graduate intern? You're sending me bottom-of-the-barrel trash now? Useless.
The HR representative who brought me in shifted uncomfortably beside me. After we finished the painful introductions and stepped away from Peterson's desk, she gave me a weary smile that spoke volumes. Well, you'll get used to it eventually, she said softly, patting my shoulder. Just hang in there." Her expression suggested that she didn't really believe her own words. Even at first glance, the department's atmosphere was suffocating. The air felt heavy with tension, and everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells around Peterson. My experience with part-time jobs during high school had taught me a lot about workplace dynamics. Under good leadership, a workplace flourishes. Employees get along well, newcomers are welcomed warmly, and the positive energy is almost tangible. Smiles come naturally, voices are energetic, and that enthusiasm translates directly into better sales and performance. But under bad leadership, the workplace becomes a battlefield. Problems fester unresolved, employee turnover skyrockets, and the negative atmosphere seeps into every interaction, even with customers. Sales inevitably decline, creating a downward spiral that's hard to break. This department was definitely on the bad end of the spectrum, so far on the bad end that had fallen off the chart entirely. After the HR representative made her escape, I found myself standing awkwardly in the middle of the office, unsure where to begin. Silence was deafening, broken only by the soft clicking of keyboards and the occasional shuffling of papers. Everyone sat at their desk, eyes glued to their computer screens as if their lives depended on it. At first glance, they appeared to be the most dedicated workers I'd ever seen. Then, Peterson's voice shattered the artificial calm.
"Who wrote this estimate? Get out here now!"
He bellowed, causing the entire department to flinch in unison. A male employee rose from his desk, his face ashen. Each step he took toward Peterson's desk seemed to age him by years. The walk of shame was painful to watch, but impossible to look away from.
"How many years have you been doing this job?"
Peterson demanded, waving a paper in the air.
"What kind of garbage writing is this?"
The employee's voice trembled as he tried to defend himself.
"But, sir, you specifically instructed me to—" "I never said anything like that."
Peterson cut him off, his voice dripping with contempt.
"You came up with this trash on your own."
The employee desperately tried to explain that he followed Peterson's instructions to the letter, but his words only seemed to fuel Peterson's rage. The manager's fist came down on his desk repeatedly, each slam making the unfortunate employee jump. I watched the scene unfold, feeling sick to my stomach. This wasn't just bad management. This was workplace bullying in its most blatant form. What made it even worse was the reaction of the other employees. In a room of about 10 people, not a single one came to their colleague's defense. They all pretended to be completely absorbed in their work, as if they could make themselves invisible through sheer force of will.
"Just redo the whole thing!"
Peterson shouted, sweeping his arms across his desk and sending papers flying everywhere. The employee dropped to his knees, scrambling to collect the scattered documents while Peterson watched with obvious satisfaction. This was far worse than anything I'd imagined when my father had described the department's problems. In just 1 hour, I'd witnessed enough toxic behavior to justify firing Peterson on the spot. But I knew it couldn't be that simple. If it were, my father wouldn't have needed to send me in undercover. Just then, a middle-aged man hurried into the room, slightly out of breath. His tie was slightly crooked, and he carried a stack of documents under one arm.
"Tyler, sorry to keep you waiting,"
he said, giving me an apologetic smile. This was Michael Collins, the person assigned to train me. He'd been out running an errand for Peterson, which explained his absence during my arrival. Michael finally showed me to my desk, a small workplace tucked away in a corner. He reached for a manual on the shelf above the desk.
"You know how to use a computer, right? I'll give you the manual and—" "Hold up!"
Peterson's voice cut through the air like a knife.
"We don't need to waste a computer on this bottom feeder. I got better things for him to do."
Michael tried to protest.
"But sir, he needs to take over the previous intern's duties." "What? Are you talking back to your manager?"
The threat in Peterson's voice was unmistakable. Michael's shoulders slumped in defeat, and he fell silent. I watched as another small piece of his dignity crumbled away under Peterson's assault. Instead of proper office work, Peterson assigned me what amounted to janitorial duties. Organizing desks, cleaning personal lockers, and making copies of what appeared to be his personal documents. I was reduced to being his personal errand boy, running back and forth across the office at his whim. It was obvious he was dumping his own responsibilities on me, but I knew better than to protest at this point. I complied without complaint, though every fiber of my being wanted to tell him exactly what I thought of his leadership style.
"Hey, not there, idiot! Over there!"
He would shout, never bothering to be specific about where there actually was.
"God, you're so slow. This is why dropouts are useless."
Even the simplest task became challenging when you're trying to please someone who seems determined to be displeased. Peterson's instructions were consistently vague, yet he expected me to read his mind perfectly. When I inevitably failed to meet his impossible standards, he would lean back in his chair and complain loudly about my incompetence. The crowning moment came when he actually hit me on the head with a rolled-up newspaper, as if I were a misbehaving puppy. I deserved an Oscar for not losing my cool right then and there. If my father hadn't given me this assignment, I might have introduced Peterson's face to that same newspaper in a much less gentle manner. Instead, I swallowed my anger and continued working as instructed. Move these files. No, not there. Over there. Rearrange these folders again and again. Clean up disgusting trash. Wipe everything down for rag. The tasks were endless and seemingly pointless, designed more to humiliate than to accomplish anything useful. When the lunch bell finally rang, it felt like I'd aged 10 years. I was exhausted. It was only noon. My shoulders ached from tension, and my pride was thoroughly bruised. Michael must have noticed my state because he invited me to lunch, offering me an escape from Peterson's kingdom of terror. I practically jumped at the chance to get away from the office, even for a short while. He took me to what he described as an affordable but good diner, a few blocks from the office. The place was small and slightly worn around the edges, but it had character. The waitress greeted Michael by name, suggesting this was one of his regular haunts. Michael could probably tell I had a rough first morning because he insisted on treating me. I tried to protest, but he wouldn't hear of it. He recommended the house special burger, and when it arrived, I understood why. The portion was generous, and the first bite nearly brought tears to my eyes. Or maybe that was just the relief of being away from Peterson's constant criticism. Once I felt human again, my curiosity got the better of me. Is the whole company like this? I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. Michael nearly choked on his coffee.
God, no!
He exclaimed, shaking his head vigorously. The force of his denial sent droplets of coffee flying from his cup. According to Michael, other departments were perfectly normal, even pleasant places to work. The toxic atmosphere was unique to their department, a direct result of Peterson's tyrannical leadership style. I had so many questions. Why was Peterson allowed to do whatever he wanted? How could such a toxic person remain in management? Couldn't anyone report him to higher-ups? When I voiced these questions, Michael's expression grew guarded. He stirred his coffee slowly, watching the liquid swirl in his cup. His silence spoke volumes about the complexity of the situation. Over the next few weeks, I continued to be Peterson's errand boy while gradually taking on some of the previous intern's duties. Data entry and document preparation on the computer. As I worked, I began to understand the department dynamics better. Michael and I had lunch together every day, and as we grew more comfortable with each other, he started opening up about the department's problems. Peterson's untouchable status, it turned out, came from two powerful connections. He was married to the executive VP's niece, and he was college buddies with the director, who was the VP's loyal subordinate. It was a perfect storm of nepotism and cryonism that made him practically untouchable.
Someone tried to report him once.
Michael confided during one of our lunch breaks, his voice barely above a whisper despite us being away from the office.
They were transferred to a dead-end position in a branch office so far away, they had to move their whole family. They ended up quitting within months.
The department had employed several interns before me, but they all quit because of Peterson's abuse. Since then, everyone had adopted a survival strategy. Don't rock the boat, don't draw attention, and maybe Peterson won't target you next. They all walked on eggshells around him, trying to become as invisible as possible. Even those who requested transfers couldn't escape cleanly. If Peterson caught wind of their plans, it would make them remaining time a living hell. So everyone just endured it, day after day, their spirits slowly being crushed under the weight of his tyranny. One day, after watching Peterson particularly lay into Michael over a minor formatting issue, I couldn't hold back anymore. "Michael, you're really good at your job," I said during our lunch break. "Haven't you thought about finding work at another company?" From what I'd seen, Michael was incredibly competent. He managed to handle double or triple the normal workload while still looking after me and other junior staff members. He was like a workplace superhero, quietly saving everyone else while taking the brunt of Peterson's abuse himself. Someone with his skills could easily find work elsewhere, probably with better pay and certainly with better working conditions. When I voiced this thought, Michael gave me a weak smile and shook his head.
I'm turning 40 soon,
he explained, pushing his food around his plate.
We just had our first baby.
His eyes lit up at the mention of his child, showing a glimpse of joy that I rarely saw in the office.
Maybe because we had him later in life, but he means everything to me. Switching jobs at my age would be a huge gamble. If I failed,
my family would end up on the street.
He took a sip of his coffee, his hands trembling slightly.
If I could just endure this job, I could keep providing for them. Instead of talking about me switching jobs, you should be the one looking elsewhere. You're young. You shouldn't be working in a toxic environment like this.
I couldn't fully understand what it meant to be a father yet, but seeing Michael sacrifice himself for his family made my heart ache. This wasn't just about workplace bullying anymore. Peterson's behavior was affecting entire families, forcing good people like Michael to choose between their dignity and their children's future. As spring break neared its end, I gotten used to the job. Peterson hadn't changed a bit, but I learned to anticipate his moves and avoid the worst of his outburst. I could barely stand one day with him. I was amazed at how the department employees had endured for so long. Ironically, Peterson's awful behavior had united the employees. They had formed a tight-knit group when he wasn't around. During his frequent absences for important meetings, which usually meant long lunches with his corporate allies, the office transformed. People would chat quietly, share snacks, and help each other with difficult tasks. They'd often ask me for help too, and in return, they'd share their frustrations and hopes for a better future. One particularly hot afternoon, I noticed Michael desperately pleading with Peterson. The conversation seemed intense, so I casually adjusted my position to hear better while pretending to organize files.
My child has a fever,
Michael said, his voice tight with worry.
I need to take him to the doctor. Please, I'm begging you to let me leave early.
Peterson leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth.
What? Isn't that your wife's job?
She's been ill since giving birth.
Michael explained, his hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles were white.
She's been bedridden since yesterday. I have to go.
The afternoon sun streaming through the windows cast harsh shadows across Peterson's face as he considered Michael's request. Rather than showing any sympathy for his employee's desperate situation, he seemed to find it amusing, like a cat toying with a cornered mouse.
That's right. You two had your kid pretty late, didn't you?
Peterson's voice dropped with mock concern.
This is what happens when old people try to have babies.
The change in Michael's expression was instant and profound. I watched as something snapped behind his eyes. His usually gentle face hardened, and his fists clenched at his sides, trembling with barely contained rage. For the first time since I'd known him, Michael looked capable of violence. I couldn't stand by anymore. Before I could stop myself, I was on my feet, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'll take over Michael's work, I announced, my voice steady despite my heart racing. Please, go home, Michael. Peterson's head snapped towards me, his eyes narrowing dangerously.
Hey, who told you interns can make decisions?
The work just needs to get done, right? I met his glare with one of my own, channeling some of my father's boardroom authority into my stance. For a moment, Peterson looked taken aback, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Something in my expression must have given him pause, because he didn't immediately shoot down my suggestion.
Huh, interesting,
he muttered, his lips curling in a sneer.
What could a high school dropout intern possibly handle? Getting pretty cocky, aren't you?
Tossed those words over his shoulder as he turned away, which I took as a reluctant permission. My internship was almost over anyway, and I had no obligation to keep playing his power games. I quickly took over Michael's workstation. Having helped him before proved invaluable. With the manual as reference, I could handle his task efficiently. Michael left for home, gratitude and relief washing over his tired face as he thanked me repeatedly. The office grew quiet as evening approached. I stayed on my computer well past regular hours, the glow of the monitor creating a small island of light in the dimming office. As Peterson was leaving, he made a point of stopping by my desk, his shadow falling across my keyboard.
You're paid by the hour, right?
His voice was thick with suspicion.
I never authorized this overtime. If you're choosing to do extra work to rack up hours, that's not happening. Clock out now.
I nodded slightly, not wanting to engage in with him further. If only he knew what I was really working on. His footsteps faded down the hallway, and I allowed myself a small smile. I'd already finished Michael's assigned work an hour ago. What I was doing now was something entirely different, something that would change everything. The clicking of my keyboard filled the empty office as I continued working, my excitement growing with each paragraph I typed. I wondered what face Peterson would make when this saw the light of the day. The thought made me type faster, barely containing my grin. On my last day as an intern, tension filled the department like static before a storm. Peterson was even more agitated than usual, stalking between the desks like a caged animal.
Listen up,
he barked, making several employees jump.
Everything better be perfect today, especially you, intern. If I find even one piece of trash, you'll regret it. Get down there and crawl around picking up garbage. Even someone useless like you can manage that.
He jabbed a finger in my direction, his face flushed with nervous energy.
And nobody better slip up.
The cause of his anxiety was clear. The CEO was making a surprise visit with his son. I could read between the lines of Peterson's warnings. Don't let anyone find out about his workplace bullying. Make it look like the department's poor performance was the employee's fault, while Peterson was working hard to fix things. He wanted to sweep his own failures under the rug and present a pristine facade to the CEO.
Hey!
Peterson's voice cracked like a whip.
Where's that performance improvement proposal I signed? Is it ready?
I sent it to the department email list yesterday.
Michael replied quietly, not looking up from his computer. Peterson ignored Michael completely, turning to me instead.
Intern, print that out. You should know to do this without being told. Completely useless piece of trash.
It was classic Peterson, covering up his own oversight by attacking others. He had probably either not read or forgotten about Michael's email, but rather than admit his mistake, he chose to berate someone else. I silently walked to the printer, my heart racing with anticipation. Everything was falling into place exactly as planned. The CEO arrived that afternoon, his presence transforming the office atmosphere instantly. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than Peterson's monthly salary, and his stern expression made even the most confident employees shrink in their seats. I watched him with a mixture of amusement and pride. He looked completely different from how I usually saw him at home. My father had really embraced his role today, radiating an authority that made Peterson practically trip over himself in his rush to bow and scrape. Peterson's behavior was a complete transformation from his usual tyrannical demeanor. I knew he belonged to the executive VP's faction, which opposed my father's policies as CEO, but even he knew better than to show anything but absolute deference to the big boss. It was typical corporate survival instinct at its finest. I noticed Peterson's confused glances around the office, clearly wondering where the CEO's son was supposed to be. But my father's imposing presence kept him from voicing his questions. The truth would dawn on him soon enough. First, my father inspected the office with meticulous attention to detail. Everything had been clean spotless for today. Even Peterson's usually chaotic desk area was tidy, thanks to the combined efforts of myself and several female employees who had stayed late the previous evening. Then, my father gathered everyone for what appeared to be an impromptu meeting. His voice carried naturally through the space as he discussed the department's declining performance and mentioned plans for reorganization. The employees listened with a mixture of hope and fear. Reorganization could mean positive change, but could also mean job losses. Peterson couldn't even wait for my father to finish speaking before launching into his excuses.
I deeply apologize.
He interrupted, bowing repeatedly.
I've been leading from the front, but the subordinates just won't cooperate. It's truly shameful.
It was almost laughable how quickly he threw his team under the bus. In any normal situation, poor performance would be considered the manager's responsibility. But Peterson was only interested in covering himself, his theatrical apologies as fake as his leadership abilities.
Before we discuss reorganization,
Peterson continued, puffing up his chest,
please look at this. We prepared a comprehensive improvement proposal. Hey, intern, bring it here quickly.
He acted high and mighty even though he hadn't written a single word of the document himself. With a carefully neutral expression, I handed the printed papers to my father. My father began reading them right here, his eyebrows rising slightly as he scanned the first pages.
Peterson,
He said slowly.
what is the meaning of this?
Huh?
My father held up the papers, and Peterson snatched them, his eyes growing wider with each line he read. I watched with satisfaction as his face cycled through several interesting colors, from blue to red to an almost purple shade. I felt a twinge of guilt for not using Michael's actual improvement proposal, but what I had printed instead was far more important. A detailed report of Peterson's misconduct and a petition I compiled after interviewing everyone in the department. Every incident of bullying, every abuse of power, every instance of Peterson using his connections to silence complaints. It was all there, documented with dates, times, and witness statements. The silence in the office was absolute as Peterson continued reading, his hands shaking so badly the papers rustled. When he finally looked up, his eyes locked onto mine with a mixture of fury and dawning comprehension.
You're...
He stammered, looking between me and my father. I smiled for the first time since starting my internship, letting my carefully masked submission fall away. Yes, Mr. Peterson, I'm the CEO's son. and I spent the last few weeks documenting exactly how you've been running this department. The collective gasp from the other employees was audible. Michael's mouth had fallen open in shock, and several others were staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and growing hope. My father cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back to him.
Mr. Peterson, I've been receiving concerning reports about this department for months, but somehow, our normal channels of investigation never seem to uncover the truth. Now I understand why.
He held up the report I had prepared.
This makes for very interesting reading.
Peterson's face had gone pale.
Sir, I can explain. These are all lies. The intern is just trying to...
Every statement in that report has been independently verified, I interrupted, my voice firm. And I have recordings of your behavior from the last 3 weeks. Would you like me to play them? The threat of actual evidence seemed to deflate Peterson completely. He slumped in his chair, all of his usual bluster evaporating in an instant. My father turned to address the rest of the department.
I want to apologize to all of you. This situation should have been addressed long ago. Rest assured, it will be dealt with immediately.
He paused, looking each employee in the eye.
And Mr. Collins.
Michael straightened in his chair.
Yes, sir?
I understand you have some excellent ideas for improving this department's performance. I'd like to hear them, as the department's new manager.
The look of pure joy on Michael's face made all the weeks of enduring Peterson's abuse worth it. Around the office, people were beginning to smile, some even wiping away tears of relief. Peterson was escorted out of the building by security that afternoon, his personal belongings to be sent to him later. As he left, I caught him giving me one final glare of hatred, but it didn't bother me anymore. His power was gone, broken by nothing more complicated than the truth finally coming to light. In the weeks that followed, the department underwent a remarkable transformation under Michael's leadership. The atmosphere lightened, productivity improved, and people actually started looking forward to coming to work. Michael's first act as manager was to implement a flexible working hours policy to accommodate employees with family responsibilities. As for me, I had finally figured out what I wanted to do with my life. Watching the department's transformation had shown me the profound impact that good leadership could have on people's lives. I changed my college major to business administration with a focus on organizational psychology. Sometimes the best way to find your path is to help others find theirs first.